Now, above this horror, you had helicopters that were flying around. Some of them were gunships. Some of them were there to pick people up, drop people off. Some of them were command and control helicopters where some senior leadership was flying around trying to observe the battles that took place. And we do end up with a real hero here, a hero that's a helicopter pilot. And his name is Hugh Clowers Thompson Jr. And he's flying around, and I'll go to the book. Thompson marked several wounded people on the ground with green smoke, a signal that they needed help. Returning to the My Lai area about 9 a.m. after the first refueling, Thompson immediately noticed that people who were previously injured were now dead. There were groups of bodies as well as many dead water buffalo. Over the radio, he warned the gunships to fire only when they could positively identify enemy target. They had good visibility as they hovered sometimes only 5 feet off the ground. Gunner Lawrence Colburn in the doorway didn't want to look at the corpses. Out in the paddy field beside a dike, 200 meters south of the village, they watched a small group of soldiers approach an injured woman of age 20. Thompson had marked her with smoke. They were flying close enough for Colburn to look at her face as she lay half in and half out of the dike. She made a feeble gesture with her hand and was obviously in need of help. Thompson put the aircraft into a standstill hover only a few feet off the ground. The high gunship told the ground forces on the radio, "You have a wounded over where the bubble is hovering." Thompson and his crew watched as an infantry officer wearing captain's bars on his helmet came up to the woman, prodded her with his foot, and then killed her. Those in the helicopter could hardly believe what they were seeing. Minutes later, over on the eastern side of the village, they saw dozens of bodies in the irrigation ditch. Movements from the ditch convinced them there were people still alive. Not far away, a group of infantrymen taking a cigarette break sat around on the ground and relaxed, taking off their steel pots. It was obvious there was no firefight taking place. So now what happens is Thompson, he's starting to be totally disturbed by what he's seeing down there. So he lands the helicopter and gets out of the helicopter. And he goes over and talks to a young infantry officer. A young infantry officer came up, and Thompson questioned him about what was happening on the ground. The officer said that it was none of his business because he was in charge of the ground troops. Several members of Callie's platoon observed Thompson's intervention. Callie had gone to speak with the bubble helicopter pilot. Stanley overheard Callie telling Sledge afterward that the pilot hadn't liked what was taking place. "He don't like the way I'm running the show, but I'm the boss here." Olson, who wanted no part in the executions at the irrigation ditch, had moved 150 meters out to the paddy field to set up a perimeter of defense. He saw the pilot angrily shaking his arms and gesticulating. Frustrated, Thompson lifted off again and circled the area for a few minutes. Almost as soon as he took off, his worst fears were confirmed. Andrada reported the sergeant was now shooting the people in the ditch. Thompson began thinking about what the Nazis had done in the last war, marching people to a ditch and blowing them away. Furious with himself and everybody else, he finally snapped. He flew over the northeast corner of the village and spotted a group of about 10 civilians, including children, running towards a homemade bomb shelter. Pursuing them were a group from 2nd Platoon returning to the village from their murderous expedition. Based on all he had seen in the village that morning, it was obvious to Thompson what would happen when the troops got to the fleeing civilians. He landed his aircraft between the villagers and the soldiers and radioed the gunships he needed help. Screaming to his crew that he had to get the people out of the bunker, he issued an instruction that bewildered Colburn. If the Americans began shooting on the villagers, Thompson said, Colburn would turn his machine gun on the Americans. "Open up on them. Blow them away," Thompson urged him. Colburn turned his gun around to face the GIs, though he was unsure whether he would be able to open fire on his own men. Concerned for their own safety, Colburn wasn't sure it was a good idea to land in the middle of a combat zone. The pilot confronted the lieutenant in charge, Stephen Brooks. He said he wanted to help get the peasants out of the bunker. Brooks told him the only way to do that was with hand grenades. Thompson shouted that he would personally get them out and told the lieutenant to stay put. With that, he went across the bunker and gingerly coaxed the civilians to come out. Crew members in the gunships overhead heard Thompson announce over the radio that an old man was sitting in the path of the troops near the door of a small bomb shelter. Thompson's voice was choking with emotion. He swore obscenities, cursed, and pleaded with the aero crew to come down and help rescue civilians. One pilot initially queried at the request, and Thompson threatened that if the infantry opened fire on the civilians, his machine gunner would turn his guns on the Americans. Danny Millions, a warrant officer on the low gunship, realized the delicate nature of the drama unfolding below and, knowing that Thompson couldn't talk directly with the ground troops, radioed the high gunship to tell the infantry to stop killing. Millions and Brian Livingston, another pilot, landed their ships and flew the Vietnamese, 2 men, 2 women, and 5 or 6 children 4 miles away to the safety of the road which ran west. I mean, you can't get any more drama than that. And eventually, Thompson gets back to base. And I'll go to the book. They arrived back at Dottie at about 11 a.m. Thompson got out of the aircraft and threw his helmet on the ground. He told his section leader what had happened, and when Millions and Livingston landed, they confirmed it. A group of them sought out their company commander, Major Fred Watke, in the aviation section's operation van.